The cost of living soaring. So why is this happening and what does it mean for you?
The war in Ukraine seems a long way away from this beach in South Shields, but the soaring price of potatoes, fish, oil, the energy to cook them is in part due to that conflict. It's causing a cost of living and a cost of doing business emergency.
But it's not just about food. Tourism, which is a lifeline to the Egyptian economy, is likely to be hit hard too. Around 40% of tourists who visit Egyptian sea resorts come from Russia and Ukraine.
Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Zimbabwe was already battling a double-digit inflation, and these price increases are likely to worsen the economic outlook.
The surge in energy prices and inflation, a global phenomenon affecting
As Russia responds to Ukraine regaining territory, join our teams bringing you the latest developments in this war.
Russia's been forced to abandon key positions in humiliating setbacks.
Ukraine still has momentum in the east. It's still launching counter.
In humiliating setbacks.
Ukraine still has momentum in the east. It's still launching counter-offensives.
These referendums, I think Moscow is raising the stakes with them.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
I'm Katty Kay in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. The campaigning is done. The votes are being counted. It is Election Day in the United States. From dawn until dusk, millions of Americans have been casting their ballots in a vote that will determine which party controls Congress in the years ahead. The Democrats fear they'll lose their majority in the House of Representatives, but there's much tighter competition for the Senate. Elsewhere, with less than 2 weeks to go, the former head of FIFA says it was a mistake to award Qatar the World Cup. And if you broke it, should you pay for it? The COP27 summit hears the argument for industrialized countries to pay trillions of dollars to developing nations to combat global warming. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. American democracy has taken center stage today as millions have cast their ballots in the midterm elections. This vote marks the halfway point through Joe Biden's first term in office, and it comes amid fierce national debates over issues like inflation, immigration, and abortion rights. Control of the House and the Senate are at stake. And hanging over everything is the potential for another Donald Trump run for the White House in just 2 years' time. We begin the programme with a report from our North America editor, Sarah Smith.
President Biden's political future depends on today's elections. His name is not on the ballot, but the results will shape the rest of his term in office. In his final message to voters, Mr. Biden told them this is about much more than him.
Today we face an inflection point. One of those moments that comes around every 3 or 4 generations. We know in our bones that our democracy is at risk, and we know that this is your moment to defend it, preserve it, protect it, choose it.
A record turnout is expected. Voters are queuing at polling stations around the country, and over 40 million people had already voted before the polls opened today.
Every election is important, every vote matters, every election is important for the United States, no matter what.
Unfortunately, the economy and inflation are also huge issues right now that put democracy second in most voters' minds, but I do think that it's in danger for sure.
The president's been warning that American democracy is under threat. Do you think that's true?
I mean, hasn't every president said that? It's no different than the last. I think, you have to take everything, what President Biden says and any other elected official with a grain of salt.
And when you're ready to cast, you'll head over to the scanners in the back corner.
Great, thank you.
Opinion polls suggest Republicans are likely to take control of the House of Representatives and maybe the Senate. They could then block almost every piece of legislation the president proposes. These elections will determine what Joe Biden can or cannot get done for the next 2 years, but they're also about a lot more than that. They may test Americans' faith in their own democracy, and they'll set the stage for 2024. Will Joe Biden stand again? Will Donald Trump decide to run?
I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
He'll be watching carefully how some of his hand-picked Republican candidates perform before making his move. The very tightest contests, like the race for the Senate seat in Pennsylvania, will be closely watched. Some seats are so close, pollsters daren't make any predictions. High numbers of postal votes may mean the final results will not be known for days. The time it took to count the votes in 2020 contributed to the rise in baseless conspiracy theories around voter fraud. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Let's hope it does not take so long this time. Now, we've got correspondents all around the country, and we're going to go to some of the key states now. We'll be hearing from Georgia and Florida in just a moment, but we're going to start in Wisconsin, where there are races for governor and seats in the House and in the Senate. Our correspondent James Clayton is there. James, are the Republicans looking at a clean sweep in Wisconsin tonight?
Yeah, I mean, they could well do. I mean, the big issues here are the economy, and we spoke to loads of people today who said it was front and centre in their minds. But a lot of them didn't actually blame Joe Biden. And actually, when you speak to Republicans, they say that crime is the issue that they're doing best on. Milwaukee, which is where we are right now, has had a huge spike in murders, and they think that is doing very, very well with swing voters. The Democrats say that partly that's due to the fact that the Republicans advocate lax gun laws, but the really big worry for the Republicans here is Roe versus Wade. That was repealed. That wasn't on the ticket in 2020 or 2018 or even 2016. They just don't know how that's going to mobilize Democratic base. So that is the big worry that Republicans have here. However, I'm being told that they are very confident tonight.
OK, well, let's go to Florida now, where Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is looking to return as governor. He may be considering a run for the Republican presidential nominee in 2024. Nedda Tawfiq is in Miami for us. Nedda, Donald Trump on Fox has just said that he thinks it would be a mistake for Ron DeSantis to run for the presidency. I think the base would not like it. Are we looking at the midterm elections, or have we just catapulted ourselves into the 2024 presidential race?
Well, Katty, I mean, look for both men to try to take credit for Florida's swing to the right. I mean, I can tell you, even though there's a storm approaching that could gain hurricane strength, there's been steady turnout at polling locations. I was at one in Miami Beach, and the voters there that I spoke with, many of them echoing the messages coming from Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, saying that they don't want the woke agenda in Florida, that they don't want democratic socialism. Even those who were self-described moderates said they feared both the right and left had become too extreme. So it's not looking great for Democrats here. But the question is, Katty, does Ron DeSantis do even better than Trump did in 2020? And if so, what does that mean for Republicans in Florida about who they support? Now, President Trump in that Fox interview, Katty, he said that he had a lot of information, harmful information on Ron DeSantis that he would put out if DeSantis did decide to run. So it could get ugly here, Katty, after these midterms.
OK, Nedda Tawfiq down there in Miami for us. 2022 very quickly bleeding into 2024 at this rate. Let's go to Georgia now. It's been one of the most contentious Senate races in the country. It is wrapping up. Gary O'Donoghue is in Atlanta for us. And Gary, this is one place where Democrats are going to be watching a little bit nervously because it's a place where they could lose a Senate seat, isn't it?
Cast your mind back 2 years, Katty. It was Georgia that clinched the Senate for Joe Biden in those two runoff races, and something similar could happen again here tonight. Challenger Herschel Walker, but neither of them anywhere near really the 50% of the vote they need to win this race outright. Georgia law says you have to get 50% vote they need to win this race outright. Georgia law says you have to get 50% plus one to win. So what we could be looking at, with some libertarian votes thrown into the mix, is another election in 4 weeks' time where Georgia voters will be asked once again to pick between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. So if you're looking to Georgia to decide the election tonight, you might not find out for another month.
Okay, please tell me it's not so. Gary O'Donoghue there for us in Atlanta, Neda Tawfiq in Miami, and James Clayton there for us in Wisconsin as well. We're going to hit across the other side of the country now, because Maricopa County in that battleground state of Arizona has once again found itself in the center of the debate over election security in this country. Officials there say that 1 in 5 voting machines weren't working properly earlier today, and some of them have now been fixed. But it's the kind of hitch that fuels speculation about the security of the election, particularly online. Our disinformation and social media correspondent Mariana Spring has been monitoring all of this for us. She joins us now. Mariana, you set up a specific online profiles, a whole series of them, to respond to events exactly like this one in Maricopa County. What have you been seeing today?
I did. So I've created 5 characters based on data from the Pew Research Center. We call them our undercover voters, and they have social media profiles across the 5 main platforms. And today that's meant I've been able to look at how these incidents of voting machines not working properly have been used to fuel existing narratives online about disinformation and conspiracy theories around rigged elections, ones that build on the same narratives we saw on social media back in 2020. When it comes to one of the voters in particular, she's called Brittany. She liked a lot of content relating to Donald Trump. She's a big fan, as well as about abortion and various topics. It's her profile in particular on sites like Instagram that has been promoted accounts suggesting that this, the voting machines not working properly, is part of an attempt to rig the election with no evidence to support that. And a lot of these profiles are then asking for donations to raise money to tackle fraudulent voting and fraudulent elections. And there are other posts that are associated to more extreme militia groups, some of whom were linked to the riots that happened at the Capitol on January the 6th. So what's important is, while those claims about the machines not working might well be true, they are used online repeatedly to fuel narratives that have been building for 2 years and that have really evolved. It's not just this stop the steal term we saw back in 2020. It's a whole range of accounts that really draw and run with these claims like wildfire. And that's happening across the social media sites. It's important to say that Meta, which owns Instagram and Facebook, says it has various measures in place to protect users from this kind of voting disinformation. But it's certainly something that Brittany, my undercover voter, has been seeing a lot today.
Okay. Mariana, just to be clear, somebody like Brittany, if we were looking at an election result that was contested, where people didn't believe in the result, is Brittany the kind of voter, the kind of person who might, after this election, say, actually, you know what, I don't trust the system?
Absolutely. It's something that it's been a theme of her social media feed, certainly for the past 2 months since I started this experiment. Narratives suggesting that her vote doesn't count, that her vote won't be counted, and that elections are rigged time and time again, even though the evidence is contrary to that. It doesn't support that idea. And I think it's really important to understand that once someone is drawn into that conspiracy world on social media, it can affect the real world. It can affect how they vote or whether they vote. It can affect democracy. And it can also lead to people taking action offline. One thing we've seen is flyers circulating suggesting people are going to protest about this.
Right, Mariana Spring there for us in the newsroom. Mariana, we're going to keep coming back to you, of course, during the course of all of the election to see what is happening to those online accounts. Now, the health of American democracy is just one of the issues on Americans' minds. There's inflation, they're looking at abortion rights, climate, all of that plays into this election. My co-host on the BBC's midterm election special programme, Christian Fraser, has been going through them all.
If you tuned in to any televised debate through this midterm campaign, you'd be forgiven for thinking the two parties were fighting entirely different elections. They're so split on what they consider the main issues. But then so are the electorate. A recent poll suggested 90% of voters would prefer Republican control of Congress for the issue of immigration and the border. 60% want Republicans to handle jobs and the economy. But in the same survey, 86% of voters said they prefer Democrats to address climate change, and 71% side with Democrats on abortion. In other words, the divide this year is unusually stark. So let's have a look at the main issues in play. In recent weeks, Republicans say they've regained momentum as inflation becomes the priority issue. Now, the economy grew by 2.6% in the last quarter, but voters aren't feeling it. Their weekly shop is getting more expensive. Despite the Fed raising interest rates 5 times this year, headline inflation is currently at 8.2% in September, down from a high of 9.1% in June. And in every race up and down the country, that is a message the Republicans are hammering home.
Savings are down and costs are up. The Biden-Pelosi economy is on the ballot.
But from inflation to abortion rights, which Democrats say is an issue that continues to impact the key battleground areas in their favour. Following the Supreme Court's decision in June to overturn Roe v. Wade, the Democratic Party has ploughed unprecedented resources into making this year's election a referendum on abortion access.
Congressman Shabbat sponsored the bill that would outlaw birth control and ban all abortions, with no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of a woman.
But in the minds of the voter, does abortion supersede the fear of crime? In a recent Gallup poll, a record 56% of people say local crime has increased where they live. That, said Gallup, marks a 5% uptick since last year. Republicans say the crime crisis is peeling off suburban voters and independents. Democrats say it's largely overblown. But in New York, what an unlikely situation. A Republican candidate for governor is competitive against the incumbent Democrat. No Republican has won a statewide race in the Empire State since 2002. But after a random shooting outside his home, the Republican candidate Lee Zeldin, he seized the opportunity. These are national issues which define local races, but the outcome by no means determined. We will know which strategy has worked best come Wednesday morning.
Well, let's hope we do know on Wednesday morning. This could drag on for a few days. Let's pull all of this election news together. With me in the studios, the BBC's Anthony Zerka. Anthony, thank you very much. I'm thinking historically. I've covered more midterm election races than I would like to admit to. This feels to me like it ought to be a blowout night for the Republicans. The economy is doing badly. Inflation is high. The president is not popular, and people think that crime is going up. Democrats don't have a chance, do they?
Well, if you look at those fundamentals, yeah, it doesn't look like it should be a good night for Democrats. The polling has been all over the place in the Senate races. It's been pointing towards a good night for Republicans in the House races. But when the polling is mixed, then you have to go back and look at what's happened historically. And historically, when you see this kind of information about the economy, this kind of presidential approval ratings, this kind of right direction, wrong direction polling that shows most Americans think the country is heading in the wrong direction, that usually suggests that it is going to be a wave election for the out-of-power party. So I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, I think only twice since the Second World War has the party that held the White House actually improved their performance in a midterm election. But, of course, we know that there are those other issues in play as well. If we were watching this from a global perspective, what should America's allies be watching for in these midterm elections? Will anything change in American foreign policy?
Oh, well, I think one of the big issues is Ukraine and American support for Ukraine in its fight against the Russians. We've already seen signs from Republicans in Congress that they will be more skeptical about extended funding for Ukraine, arms to Ukraine, financial support to Ukraine. They said no blank check for the war. So that could be inaction on America's part, not something that America does, but something that America doesn't do when it comes to foreign policy. Of course, immigration is another big issue. Trade is something else that, with Republicans in control, you could see a change in policy.
And then we should talk about Donald Trump, because he has now inserted himself, as we said earlier, into the election race. And a lot of America's allies, after Donald Trump left office, thought, well, perhaps things would resume a bit more like a normal presidency, a normal relationship. I have never seen so much international interest in a midterm election. Is it really about 2024 and Donald Trump?
I think it's definitely about Donald Trump. And I think, we can get really involved in talking about the economy, inflation, abortion, immigration. But we have to remember, this is the first federal election since January 6th and the attack on the Capitol. I think a lot of our foreign audience sees that. I've been answering questions on our website all day, and the questions they ask are, are these midterm elections going to go off smoothly? What happens if Republicans dispute the election results? Is it possible that there could be violence at polling places or violence on the streets? They saw what happened at the Capitol 2 years ago. They remember, and they're wondering, is this the new normal for the United States?
Yeah, my daughter is a poll worker in Chicago today, and I have to admit, I woke up and thought, I hope that she is going to be safe, which you shouldn't have to think in an American election. Quick look at other news, though, from around the world. There is other news around the world. The world record in lottery jackpots, one on a single ticket, has now been broken by one lucky Powerball player in California who has won a staggering amount of over $2 billion. The winner bought their ticket at a service station in Los Angeles. No, it was not me. The embattled British government minister Gavin Williamson has resigned just weeks after being appointed. Sir Gavin had been facing bullying allegations. The resignation could prove embarrassing for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who brought Sir Gavin back into government after he had already been sacked twice. Officials in Washington have stressed that only Ukraine can decide whether to start talks with Russia and that Moscow will have to face justice for its actions, amid reports that the US has been encouraging Ukraine to show it's open to dialogue. The Football World Cup kicks off in Qatar in less than 2 weeks, and the former president of FIFA, Sepp Blatter, says the decision to award the Gulf nation with the soccer tournament was a mistake. There have been allegations of corruption and mistreatment of workers on construction site. And there's also been widespread criticism over comments made by one of Qatar's ambassadors for the World Cup, who said homosexuality was a result of damage to the mind. Our sports correspondent Jane Dougal has more.
A protest to pressure FIFA days before a World Cup in a country where same-sex relationships are illegal. And fresh controversy, as former Qatar player Khalid Salman, now an ambassador for the tournament, was asked about homosexuality. He told a German broadcaster it was haram, which means forbidden, but he went further, denouncing same-sex relationships.
But do you think gay is haram?
It's haram. Because why is haram? I am not one big Muslim, but it's haram. Why? Because it's damage in the mind.
At this point, a World Cup official steps in, bringing the interview to an abrupt halt. His words, though, have upset many, including Helen Hardy, the founder of LGBT football team Manchester Laces.
It was so definite, what was said, and so deeply offensive, and I don't think it could be taken any other way. So we're quite clear on how they feel about LGBTQ plus people.
The 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
It's been controversial from the start. 12 years ago, when Qatar was given the 2022 World Cup, there was wide criticism. Not just on the outlawing of homosexuality, also their poor human rights record and unbearable temperatures forcing the tournament to be moved to the winter months. The then FIFA president, Sepp Blatter, was a champion of the decision at the time. However, speaking to the BBC for an upcoming 5 Live podcast, Blatter admitted it had been a mistake, not for any of the obvious reasons.
It's a big organization. It needs also a big country. Qatar is too small to do that. I said to myself, I was right at a certain time to say we should not go there.
Labour MP Luke Pollard, who is openly gay, says this cannot happen again.
I think FIFA has real questions to answer about how they make sure that the World Cup goes to places where fans can support their team, be true to themselves, and not have to hide in the closet to be able to support their national team.
More than 1 million visitors are expected to travel to Qatar for the World Cup. Despite the words of Khalid Salman, the host country's organisers have said that everyone is welcome. Jane Dougal, BBC News.
It seems unlikely that controversy is going to die down anytime soon. Now, the debate over how much industrialised nations should compensate developing nations for climate change is taking centre stage at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has said that loss and damage caused by climate change should be an integral part of the meeting's agenda. The Namibian president told the BBC the world's biggest polluters were criminals and the world's poorer nations were their victims. Our climate editor Justin Rowlett has more.
You can't move for global leaders here in Egypt. There's John Kerry, the US climate envoy, and the former governor of the Bank of England. How big an issue is climate change? Billionaire philanthropist Michael Bloomberg isn't talking, but island nations in places like the Caribbean are already battered by hurricanes. Climate change is likely to make those storms even more intense.
Profligate producers of fossil fuels have benefited from extortionate profits at the expense of human civilization.
The Prime Minister of Barbados is leading efforts to reform international financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to make it easier for developing nations to access cash for climate.
Justice and solidarity. Justice is simply about fair play, and solidarity. Without solidarity, small countries, small people like me can't make it. I believe that this is a conversation whose time has come.
Today, the work of the conference begins in earnest. An army of diplomats and lawyers seeking agreements.
This is the main conference hall where the leaders speak, and as you walk around this truly vast convention centre, you get an idea of the range of issues under discussion. There are lots of representatives of the fossil fuel industry here too. There is pressure to have gas defined as a green fuel, yep, because it's lower carbon than coal and oil. And there are hundreds of businesses here too. Today, the UN announced an effort to stop greenwashing, companies pretending to be environmentally friendly when they're not really.
With so many issues on the agenda and so many opposing views, finding compromises is going to be hard, but it will be the only way to make progress here in the desert sands. Justin Rowlett, BBC News, Egypt.
Climate change is not an important issue, unfortunately, in these midterm elections. Now, before we go, it's not all politics here in Washington at the moment. These pictures were from the early hours of this morning here in the Capitol as a red moon was rising over the nation's capital. It was a total lunar eclipse when the sun, the moon and Earth align, and Washington won't see another one like it for another 3 years. That red moon over Washington, could it be an omen of what's to come as those midterm results roll in? You'll have to wait and find out.
Hello there. October brought a lot of warmth across parts of northern and western Europe, and we're seeing that warmth return this week. Ahead of this band of clouds, a lot of really mild air